In feudal society, armed aggression was an accepted means to settle disputes. Warlords often staged conflicts as violent games, with the prize going to the one whose knights performed best in battle. The Dukes of Bridgeford and Wallings devised such a conflict. Each starts with 10 knights equally armed. The terrain is partitioned into sectors. A cursed forest and pit of molten lava beckon men to their doom. Dragons, demons, and boogeymen stalk about, possessing strange powers. The tournament is held in 10 rounds. One knight from each side alternately advances, capturing sectors as he goes. Once captured, a sector may not be reoccupied by either knight during that round. Venturing into a prohibited sector means instant death for a knight, and victory for his opponent. The Duke whose men attain the highest total score after 10 rounds wins the tournament and gains control of all the land. If there's one fundamental question we've asked over 24 episodes of these videos, it's this. What do you do with TI Basic games? What's the point of them? They exist, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I think we'd all agree they should be archived in some form. But beyond that, are they worth your time 40 plus years after they came out? Can they be fun? Is this gaming or archaeology? I think we've established some basic truths. Some kind of games just don't cut it. Even the most cleverly executed action games are either too slow to enjoy or too primitive to have staying power. Nostalgia and programming exercise aside, nobody needed a TI Basic Donkey Kong or Pac-Man or Space Invaders, even back when the real versions cost more and were harder to get. But that leaves a vast ocean of simulation, adventure, and board games that, when done right, can be captivating. Still primitive? Obviously. Worth enjoying in their natural habitat, particularly on real iron. Obviously, not a ton of people still care in the grand scheme of things, but if you're here right now, you'd probably say yes. And so do I. There's been a push to compile old games, or run them in some other language to speed them up, and in some cases it provides just the push that game needs to be a little less crappy. Whether I think it's a good use of time and resources is a moot point. If there's a way to tinker with something, people are going to do it, even if the end result is just a hard drive full of somewhat faster knockoffs of the aforementioned arcade games. One trick people have been using since the 80s is a program called BXB, which uses an assembly language subroutine to enable TI Extended Basic to access 16 ASCII characters it couldn't before. Those characters are available in Console Basic, and a lot of BASIC programs take advantage of them, so they can't run as is in standard Extended Basic. With BXB, they can, and the program gets a corresponding boost in speed. But here's the thing. Take a game like Walls and Bridges, created in 1983 on a bare console with a tape deck. It was never designed to run on a disk-based system, and it uses every scrap of memory. You can merge it with the BXB program and run it with Extended Basic, which gives you access to 32K memory expansion and solves all your problems. Except for one. Alan Salomon, the programmer, was very good at his job. His task was to make a game that was compelling and fun and involved timing on the part of the player, even if it wasn't split-second arcade action. Walls and Bridges relies on that timing loop he created to run in BASIC at that speed. Simply put, the game's not as fun faster. I only had the modified BXB version, so to play it as it was originally released, I had to cut and paste the basic code, minus the assembly add-ons, and save that file in TI Basic. I can only paste it into the Classic 99 emulator by typing in call file 0 and then new first to clear every byte possible for the code. You have to remember to do that every time you load in the basic version from the virtual disk in emulation, or you'll get a memory full error. All of that to say, I'm finally playing unadulterated TI Basic Walls and Bridges on my emulator, and thus I am able to make this video for you today. So what is going on here? Walls and Bridges clearly has its roots in the Snake or Tron Light Cycles family of games, but in playing to the language it's written in, it's a turn-based game. Impressively, it not only has 3 AI-controlled bad guys wandering the grounds, but a computer opponent that's not too shabby. Survival is the main goal, and taking up tiles is a secondary mission. At the beginning of the game, you can set the maximum number of moves per turn from 1 to 5. You can move in all 8 directions from 1 to the maximum you set, and if you run into anything, whether it be lava, trees, your opponent's fortifications, or your own, you lose the round. You can also modify gameplay by setting a difficulty level, which decreases the amount of time you have to make a move, and by choosing whether or not to add sector marks to the playfield. Without those little dots, you're just guessing when you choose how many spaces to move, and it adds an additional level of challenge. The input mechanism is a clever one, and the reason why the game plays better in Basic. Whatever you've set the max number of moves to, that number appears in your knight's space. Move at that moment, and you move that many spaces. Give it a second and that number counts down 1. Let it count down past 1 and you stay in the same place and give up your turn. After you and your opponent take your turns, one of the 3 monsters, which are invisible at all other times, move closer to one of you and briefly appear on the screen. The monsters will go after you or the computer player. They are truly agents of chaos. Both the knights and the monsters can wrap around the screen, making it a challenge to get away from the baddies and to try to box in your opponent. Diagonals make that task even harder, as one of you can cut through a corner and make a break for open space before a more solid barrier can be built. Sometimes a round can be decided by who got boxed into a dead end first and how slowly you can use up that last remaining green space before you have nowhere to go. Sure, you can sit tight and not move once you're trapped, but it'll only be a matter of time until one of the monsters makes you its lunch. When one of you crashes or gets eaten, the survivor gets 100 points, plus 1 point for each sector covered during the skirmish. A full game lasts 10 rounds. So it's more or less medieval Snake as a board game, but it has that factor I like to call slow motion anxiety going for it. In its original form at least, there's no pause button, so even though you're not breathlessly Twitch gaming, you've got to stay focused or you'll miss your chance to make the proper move when it's your turn. You have to do a lot of quick thinking to change up your strategy on the fly, all while your opponent is doing their best to box you in and herd you toward monsters and blind alleys. I mean, it's not chess or anything, but it's a fine little strategy game with a lot of atmosphere. We reviewed another TI Imagination game, Zombie Mambo, way back in episode 6, and I mentioned that phenomenon of slow motion anxiety there too. It's quite an accomplishment to make a turn-based game that still has that sense of urgency, and built-in factors that make walking away for a second a fatal mistake. This is my jam right here. The ability to meet the language where it is, make a compelling game experience without trying to do something the system just can't do. Walls and Bridges is the kind of game that makes it worth sifting through 100 tapes and random FTP folders full of assorted forgotten basic offerings. I'll always give those other games a shot, and archive them for posterity here in the War Room. But a game like Walls and Bridges is one I'll come back to, and be excited to play, and make that connection to the early days when only our most capable sorcerers could truly get medieval.